Want to make a podcast? Spotify's got a platform that lets you make one super easily, then distribute it anywhere and everywhere. You can even earn money all in one place for free. It's called Spotify for Podcasters, and here's how it works.
Spotify for Podcasters lets you record and edit podcasts right from your phone or computer, so no matter what your setup is like, you can start creating today.
Then you can go ahead and distribute your podcast to Spotify and anywhere else podcasts are heard.
Video podcasts are also available on Spotify. And when you want to take the conversation with your fans to the next level, Q&A polls are the best way to get them talking.
With Spotify for Podcasters, you can earn money in a variety of ways, including ads and podcast subscriptions.
And best of all, it's totally free with no catch. We've been using Spotify for Podcasters, and we highly recommend you give it a try. Download Spotify for Podcasters app or go to www.spotify.com/podcasters and get started.
Hey guys, welcome back to That's So Fringy podcast. I'm Rick.
I'm Kristen.
And we are here again with our friend Vicki Joy Anderson. We're so excited to have you back. Vicki, how are you today?
I'm doing great. I'm happy to be back. Thank you for having me back. And I've been looking forward to this one.
So have we. Kristen's been so excited about this one. We had such a great conversation the first time, and I think we've mentioned on the podcast before. You were one of our first interviews that we ever did, and so this is full circle for us. And we're just curious now that we have you here in our hot little hands. We're curious what God is doing in your life now, because you were doing a lot of stuff with sleep paralysis. You wrote the book. We talked, briefly about that. We got into some metaverse and some kingdom stuff, but where are you at nowadays? Where's God have you, and what is he doing in your life today?
Yeah, absolutely. It's definitely been morphing. I think it's been about a year and a half now since I've been talking about the book and talking about the contents of the book. And let me tell you the growth in my own personal faith in writing this book.
Sure.
When I first wrote out the book proposal, so this is what you do in the real world of writing. You don't write a book and then push it on publishers. You write a proposal. This is what I'd like to write about. And you don't want to come to a publisher with a ready to publish book, because they might have a word count, or they might have things that you don't want to end up having to trash it and start over. So I wrote this book proposal. And when LA came to me and said, yeah, I'm going to publish it, I was like, can I even do this? Can I write this? And I'm reading through my proposal, all the chapter summaries, and I'm like, can I even write this book? There was a lot of anxiety. There was a lot of anxiety. And then after I got over that first hump and I was kind of had the momentum going, then it became, oh my goodness, what if the book doesn't live up to what I think it should?
Right.
What if I write this book and, because I was an English major, it's got really pretty constructed sentences and it's very fun and invigorating for people to read. But if it doesn't help anybody, it's of no value. And so the Spirit has to be moving over this.
Right.
And then I had this horrible phase where I thought, what if LA reads the book and has a massive regret that he let this little novice idiot, and what if he changes his mind and the carpet gets pulled out from underneath me, and then I have to be all this disappointment. So I went through all of these stages of anxiety and doubt and self-doubt and all this stuff. So one of the things that was a real struggle for me is I was concerned because I didn't want to build on anyone else's foundation. If something is already out there in the ether about sleep paralysis, I don't need to write it. It's already out there. And a lot of what's out there isn't true. And it's very deceptive, or it's very much gaslighting the situation, or despiritualizing it. And I thought, because the book was the result of a lot of prayer and fasting. Like, what should I write? What do I leave in? And tons got cut out of the book. The original was 3 times longer. And so what I was really concerned about was that there was a few things that I put in there that if you put a gun to my head, I could not have proven it to you. There's no peer reviewed evidence. There's no statistics. There's no case studies. I just knew that I knew that I knew that the Holy Spirit was telling me, this is what you write. And so one of those things was the threshold covenant, where I was comparing in chapter 4, I was comparing these entities to vampires. They all follow the vampire code. They're not allowed to cross the threshold unless you give them invitation. And so it wasn't until I published the book and was on shows such as this, where hosts were coming with really good questions, that I was sort of fleshing out the depth of that in real time. And as I'm being asked questions and the Spirit's literally like putting the answers in my mouth, I started to realize 6 months in, 9 months in, a year and a half in, that threshold covenant chapter wasn't just kind of cool or like, ooh, it's got vampires in it, so it's like, it'll sell the sizzle, right? Sell the sizzle, right? I realized that wasn't just like a cool chapter. And I love the fact that it's like right in the middle of the book. It's almost like the linchpin of the book. I didn't realize how not only was I dead on with that, but I didn't realize until it started happening that as you explain what these entities are doing, you can perfectly explain that they're doing it because they're mimicking something biblical. They're mimicking the gospel. They're mimicking the bridegroom coming back to the church. They're mimicking Revelation 3:20, behold, I stand at the door. And so unbeknownst to me, and much to my absolute joy, instead of sitting here for a year and a half glorifying shadow people and hat men and incubuses and all this stuff, I have been able to perfectly transition a whole topic about sleep paralysis into preaching the gospel. And you would think that I would be met with a lot of hostility and being interrupted and cut off, or shows not getting, put on the air and whatever. And I found out, contrary to everything that the enemy wants us to think, that people out there are not hostile. They are curious. They're confused. The Christian and the evangelical and the Catholic Church have failed to make sense of things. And so people have abandoned it, thinking it doesn't make sense or this or that. And I have just marveled at how genuinely curious and interested non-religious people are, and how absolutely able they are to not only tolerate, but to be fascinated by basically the gospel presentation. But it's packaged in this topic that everyone wants answers about. So they're willing to listen. And I'm sure there's some of them that in the back of their head, they're thinking, oh, the Jesus crap, here we go. Right. But the fact is, a lot of these podcasters, you would think that if you just opened up the broadcasting world to a bunch of novices, that you would just have a lot of people that would be out of their element. And I can't even tell you how professional and prepared and objective so many of these podcasters have been with me. I mean, we really do have an amazing corner in history where the mic has finally been handed over to the deplorables.
To the people,
And a lot of us have a lot to say. And a lot of us aren't as kind of stupid and simple-minded as the people that used to own the mics think we are. And I'm just thrilled with where we're at now in our, at the same time, we're getting restricted and we're getting shadow banned and we're getting cut off and we're losing freedoms of speech. But I think that that's a testament to how powerfully effective a lot of this communication has been.
Yeah.
Well, and I think a
agree.
lot of these Christians standing up and just saying, you know what, we're not going to be harnessed anymore. We're not going to be muzzled anymore. I think a lot of these people are these podcasters that I've run into or met or interacted with, or people like yourself. It's been just basically a lack of fear anymore. Like you were talking about at the very beginning, where you had this great anxiety come over you with the book and all of those different things. And I think that's the ticket is, what do you do with that anxiety? What are we doing with that fear? And are we saying that we can't do this because we're not qualified or whatever else, which we've come to find out is just white noise that they put in our head, right? This is white noise. Saying you're not good enough is the devil's way of saying you shouldn't look in there, or you shouldn't do that because that's scary, and you don't want to be scared, and it's that fear that keeps everybody from looking at demons in the face or doing those things, because they forget, right, that greater is he that is in us than he that is in the world. We forget that. But I think we're waking up to that again, right? We're remembering that we have nothing to fear, that if we put on the full armor of God and we invoke the name of Jesus in everything that we do, because that's where all of our authority comes from, then we can talk about these things, because our internet doesn't shut off anymore like it used to. Right. Yeah. Or our things don't mess up like they used to. When we first started doing this, it was hectic. It was crazy. Our episode with you was garbage. It was terrible. And it was so much that we had to piece together and edit and all of those different things. But we got it out because we were persistent, and we weren't taking no for an answer. And I'm not saying that to pat us on the back. I'm saying that's what it takes, is that persistence.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. At first, when every single show without fail that I did behind the scenes had tech issues, you listen to a podcast and you're like, there's Vicki talking for 30 minutes. There's Vicki talking for an hour. A lot of those podcasts was 2.5, 3 hours of my time between the mic shutting off and us getting new Zoom links and starting over, and it didn't record and all that. But what started out as sort of anxiety turned into almost this joy that every time it happened, it was like, wow, we must really be onto something here. We must really be talking about stuff that they don't want us to talk about if they're trying this hard. And so then I started paying attention and writing down, whenever there was tech issues, I would write down what was the last question they asked me. And I found a lot of continuity between when those tech issues would come on. And so that allowed me to hone in on very specific prayers. So I would say before a podcast to my prayer team, if they ask this, this, or this, so I didn't just say like, pray for the tech. I would say, pray that when they ask, who are these entities, or what do they want, or what's their agenda, that Satan would be bound, and that his little minions would, lose, they'd be all thumbs and can't hit the switches, right? And so it sort of kind of became this little like arm wrestling match behind the scenes that I was thoroughly enjoying, that nobody else really gets to get it, to be in on the joke. But it was all like, I would get done and I would go from, people asking like, how did it go, from, oh, it was so frustrating, it took twice the time because of the tech issues and my Zoom wouldn't work and I got to do this. It turned into, how did your podcast go? I'm like, it was awesome. We had tech issues like through the whole thing. Like, it was great,
Yeah.
Yes.
We've even coined a whole new phrase, which is, when you're over the target is when you're being messed with, right? We have this whole new thing that everybody understands now. We all say that. And that's the truth, is when you're over the target is when they're messing with you. And you can say that now on social media and everywhere, and everybody knows what that means. But that wasn't the case before. It was more of, you're over the target when you disappear,
Oh, yeah.
But now we're so big, and there's such a huge movement that there isn't. You would have to take out half of society or more right now, because it's this overflowing mass that they just can't get a handle of. And it makes me laugh, because they have had their thumb on this for so long that it's just makes me laugh. It's what you get.
The law of unintended consequences goes both ways, right? Mm-hmm. And what I love about this is, somewhere in a celestial boardroom, these little minions got together at their boardroom table and came up with the greatest mind control idea they could possibly think of. And they're like, we're going to start a Borg collective. We're going to start this hive mind.
There you go.
And they'll all be puppets on our strings. And it's like, what they didn't intend was, we as believers and researchers have also formed a collective mind. Yes. And now we have all these tools that you created to bring us down initially. And now, instead of knowing 20 people or 100 people in your little town, we now can connect with people all over the world. We can we can share notes. We can teach each other. And there's a hive mind over here too. Mm-hmm. And instead of using it to control other people or make other people afraid, we're using it to set captives free. And I love it. I think they sort of messed up on showing their hand a little bit too much with that one, because I think the believers were like, well, hey, a collective of information. Okay, we can work with that.
Yeah,
we can work with that. Yeah. Yeah, I think Christians have had a hard time working with certain things throughout, because they've had help, when it comes to like music, and they can throw money at concerts. They can throw money at this stuff. So, Christian music's always been kind of, and then you've got Christian movies, which are always kind of, but when you bring it to now, where you have like, this is a podcast that we run out of our house. And I don't have to have a really big budget or anything like this to run my mouth. This is it. This is all I have to do. And so
you just need to give him a platform, and he'll go for days.
Yeah. And so it's like, cancel me. What? Cancel me how? What are you going to do? Just pull my internet connection? Come on.
Right. Like, I want to talk to your manager.
Yeah, exactly. There's no manager.
There is no manager.
Oh my gosh. Now Rick's frozen.
See, here we go.
Here comes the tech stuff. All right, let's get into it then. Right. They want to knock us down. Let's talk about something fringy.
That's right. Pushing through.
So explain to us this epiphany that you had, because I don't think a lot of people know what you're talking about.
Okay.
And I would love for somebody that spent the amount of time that you've spent diving into it to explain it to me, rather than somebody go look it up on Wikipedia, because I think you have some insight from the Holy Spirit. So let us have it, if you don't mind.
So what was slowly rolled out to me in my own knowledge was, I had this aha moment when I was writing the book. And the aha moment came about through much prayer and much fasting. I remember going to my dad several times and saying, I've got all these pieces and I know they connect, but I do not know how. Like, there's this big missing link in the middle. And I always think about this Dilbert cartoon that I had a boss that loved. He had it hanging up in his cubicle. And Dilbert's in the boardroom, and there's 3 of those easels with the big pads on it. And on one of them is like a light bulb. And then the last one is a big like piggy bank or dollar sign or something. So in other words, we've got this innovative idea. It's going to make tons of cash. And then the middle board is like how you get from A to B or A to C. And the middle board is just like a drawing of a pair of underwear. Like meaning like, we don't know, like your guess is as good as mine. I don't know how we're going to make money out of this idea. So I told my dad, I said, I got like all these ideas, and all I got is underwear, man. Like, I don't know where all this connects. And
that's so good.
So he would always be like, we're going to pray right now. And so right then and there, he would pray, and I would have to fast. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm going to be skin and bones and starve to death by the time this book is written, I swear, And I mean, the Lord really made me work very hard. It wasn't like writing takes a lot of self-discipline. Mm-hmm. Thinking takes a lot of self-discipline, and research takes a lot of self-discipline. So when you've got all 3 of those, and then on top of it, you're having to work extremely difficult to get a word from the Lord, and like everything checked off, like from the boss, like this is what you're supposed to write. So it was very arduous and a lot of warfare. A lot of times where I'd sit to write and I would just be overcome with like exhaustion. And I'd literally wake up like asleep on my keyboard. And yeah, I mean, it was just, there was some ridiculous things there. So I was trying to make this connection, and two things finally came into my mind, and they were both of God, because I'm not this smart. I had this thought pop into my head that back in like 2016, this was about 3 years prior, I had been at a conference and I had heard Zev Parat give a talk. And I'm like, I think I took notes in my phone. So I went to my notes and I did a little search, and I found the notes, and he had talked about threshold covenants. Mm-hmm. And as I'm reading through these notes, thinking, this is awesome, you could write a whole book on this, but what does it have to do with sleep paralysis? As I'm reading about all of these thresholds and entities that step over it, and blood on the doorpost to protect you from the angel of death coming in, and these threshold covenants being hospitality rituals and covenanting with the people that come into your home. And as I'm reading all this, all of a sudden it clicks that anywhere from 5 to 9 times out of 10, depending on who you are and how deep down the rabbit hole with your sleep paralysis experiences you are, almost every time you wake up in this state of paralysis and you see or sense an entity in your room, it's at the bedroom door. Mm-hmm. And all these firecrackers started going off in my head. I got so excited, but I was still like, this is out of scope. This is out of scope.
Right.
This is just my own personal lifelong fascination with vampires that wants to put it in the book. And I'm like, this can't possibly have to do with sleep paralysis. This isn't Count Dracula. This is so stupid. But the more I researched, the more I realized, this is something that I realized. We think that the longer we go in time, the smarter we get. The more sophisticated we get, the more civilized we get. When it comes to spiritual and supernatural things, we actually are getting dumber if we don't have the Spirit of God. Mm-hmm. And what I found with a lot of this supernatural stuff, this paranormal stuff, this demonic stuff, and those are all three completely separate things. Sometimes they overlap, but is that we went from thousands of years ago, going all the way back to the Epic of Gilgamesh, where the Sumerians, then the Akkadians, the Babylonians, the Egyptians, these people didn't talk about vampires, shadow men, Pat man. I mean, think how kindergarten primary level it is when you have a malevolent being in your room and all you can say is, it was a hat man. I mean, that's like the way a 3-year-old would explain it. Right. I mean, how basic can you get? Well, explain to me, you're at the police officer, telling, like, describe the man who broke into your home. Yeah. He wore a hat. How is the illustration? Yeah, right. So
just a hat.
Exactly. So if you go all the way back thousands of years, these things, you could see their faces. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You did know what their features looked like. They described them perfectly. Now it's like, what did his face look like? I couldn't see a face. It was a black shadow. I saw red eyes. That's about all you'll get, Mm-hmm. But back then, they wrote whole epic poems about who these entities were, what their birth certificate names were. Oh, that's Lamashtu. Oh, that's Lilith, the screech owl, the night demon. And in Psalm 91, we don't even recognize it anymore. But in Psalm 91, there's at least 5 or 6 verses where a word that we're just taking as a regular word is actually the name of an entity. You'll find it in the dictionary of deities and demons. The Pechad, the Medei, these are actual names of entities, and there's other ones too. Those are just the two that pop into my mind right now. And there's other passages in Isaiah where it'll talk about owls and wolves and whatever. But if you go all the way back and you're in the Geneva Bible, or you're in the Septuagint, or you're in like rabbinical literature, it's not saying owls and it's not talking about a zoo here. They're talking about actual night demons that had names, and it'll say like the Pachad or the Lami or the Lamashu or the Lilutu, or they had names. So I realized that we have dumbed down and we have romanticized. I mean, if you think Bram Stoker romanticized the vampire, and then you fast forward to all this ridiculous Twilight nonsense, where everybody's glittering and taking you to prom and all this nonsense, right? We have so romanticized this. But even the succubus, you see these Victoria Angel supermodels in their black wings that go to the floor in their black underwear, right? And those aren't just fallen angels; those are like Skyrim succubus night demons that they are dressing up there. And even in like The Shining, when he's in the room with the beautiful woman, and then he catches her in the mirror, and she's the succubus, right? She's the Lilith. And so Hollywood has really romanticized this, and the literary world before it really romanticized it. These night demons are romantic and debonair, and they have perfect British English, and it's so seductive, and these passionate kisses just turn into, I'm going to be, your eternal boyfriend, or whatever they're trying to get us to believe. But
yeah, what if you break up? Come on.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, then where do you go? But if you actually read, the Sumerian literature and the epics and the stories about, Inanna and all of this stuff, these weren't goddesses of love. This wasn't Cupid, poking you in the butt with an arrow and you fall in love. Like these goddesses were treacherous. There was nothing There was nothing loving or romantic, or even lust. Even to say lust is like not. They were bloodthirsty, murderous, and they would pose however they needed to get their prey. Some with vinegar, some with honey, right? But it's fascinating to me that the more I talked about it after the book got published, how Moses couldn't split the sea until he got like waist deep in the water. Right. The waves didn't part for me until the book was published and in print, where my name is on the cover, and researchers and experts who know more than me could come to me and say, you're an idiot and you don't know what you're talking about. Right. So I had to put my name on the line there, and by faith just say, these things are coming to the threshold. And what I originally thought was, they're coming to the threshold because it's like they're like vampires. And that's the law of the vampire. They come to the threshold. They can't come in unless they're given an invitation. And then once they're invited, the only way you can get rid of them is, I suppose, if you die, the contract's, till death do you part, right? But the only way to undo a contract with a vampire is the deed of the house has to change hands. Ownership of the home changes hands. So for quite a while, I'm doing these interviews and I'm like, oh yeah, they really are vampires. That's where we get, it's not even vampire lore. It is like the lore of the astral realm. Like they have to have permission and all this. Well, then it got even deeper. Just when I thought it couldn't get like cooler than that, right? I realized anytime the enemy is up to something, you have to ask, well, why is he doing this? Why is he wasting so much time and energy doing this?
Right.
I used to think as a kid, before I had it figured out, doesn't Satan have better things to do than just scare the crap out of kids? Like, little people under the bed, boo, and then, mommy, I'm scared. Like, I mean, don't they have better things to do? And I do think some of these entities are just impish. Like, I do, like, just like there's a massive range of personalities here amongst human beings, right? Some of us are sarcastic. Some of us can be catty. Some of us are downright sociopathic, right? But some of us really like twisting the screws and pushing people's buttons, and so I think it's kind of the same thing. There might be, I can only speculate, what if there is a vast creativity amongst the personalities of these various entities, and what if some of them do want to actually destroy your life and bring you to the brink of madness and lead you to suicide and kill you, and they thrive on blood. And what if some of them are like little children and they're just impish and they like to switch your furniture around and hide your keys and have people just, who knows? So that was kind of where I was at in my immaturity with like, well, I guess some of these guys are just little kid entities that just get their jollies off of like hiding your keys and stuff. But what I started to realize as I got deeper and deeper down the rabbit hole in researching this, and again, I really want to give props to, I've been on probably 150 different podcasts now at this point, and I really do owe a lot of what's the word I'm trying to think of? My advancement in the depth of my knowledge on this topic, not to my own research, but to the fact that so many other intelligent people who have also contemplated these things their whole lives have asked questions, or who have told me their stories, or who have, what about this? What about that? And so much of my knowledge that has progressed forward in the last year and a half has just been these amazing conversations.
Yeah. That's that iron sharpens iron.
Absolutely. So what started to shift for me about 6 months ago was, why are they coming to the door and doing, like, mimicking this whole vampire thing? Like, why is that important to them? Like, what does this even mean? And then, just because of all of my research into the occult and my work with SRA and work with Through the Black and stuff with Russ and everything, I realized they don't have a creative bone in their body. Like, all they can do is take what God has done or is doing and mimic it or mock it. Like, it's all that they can do. And so, I mean, there would be no occult if there was no Bible, because they wouldn't have a script. It's their script.
Exactly.
So I thought, well, what's happening in the Bible that they're mimicking? When is Jesus coming to the door and asking to be invited in? And I was like, oh. So I'll bring you to two places. The one, everybody already has it in their mind and they're already quoting it, Revelation 3:20. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door and lets me in, I will come in and eat with him and sup with him, whatever. Now, some very interesting things. We know from John 10 that the good shepherd comes in through the front gate, because if he was to come in anywhere else, he'd be a thief or a robber. So here we have Jesus knocking on a door. And we have to do three very intentional things with our mind, will, and emotions before he comes in. And once we let him in, the inference is that he steps over the threshold. And once he steps over the threshold, there's a covenant, because when it says that he's going to sup with us, that infers the breaking of bread. And in Semitic cultures and in the language and culture of the scriptures, if you broke bread with someone, you were covenanting with that person. I will lay down my life for you. You are like a blood-born son. And so this makes sense of some obscure scriptures, like don't even eat with a non-believer, because you're covenanting with them. And this is the salt covenant. And because we don't want to just eat a spoonful of salt because that'd be gross. Bread is the carrier of salt. That's how we can intake salt. And it's the salt covenant. And the thing with the salt is it is a less gory, more civilized. It's the poor man's blood covenant, because the people that were doing the blood covenants had fatted calves, and they had wealth, and they had animals, and the poor people, they could do the salt. They could make a loaf of bread, and salt and blood are both major components of our body. And if we were to be stripped of either one, we would die. So salt is just a poor man's blood covenant. So when it says that Jesus knocks at the door, and if we even hear it, we have the Spirit. If we get up off our lazy butts and answer the door to see who it is, then we've showed some initiative. And if we open the door and invite him in, it shows our free will. That means he steps over the covenant. We've invited him in. He's been given permission. And once he's over the threshold, he breaks bread with us, which means I will never leave you or forsake you. You are now like a blood-born son or daughter. And if anything comes to harm you, I will lay down my own life to protect you. And he salt covenanted with the disciples at the Last Supper. The last promissory note that Jesus gave to us as believers before he died at that Last Supper was, I'm going to go and prepare a place for you. I'm going to lay down my life for you. And then I'm going to come back for you, which is the salt covenant. That's the salt covenant, which is why Judas, who broke the salt covenant, was the one who dipped in the dish. Remember? This was Passover. So you got to think the bread at this point in time was not real tasty because it didn't have any leaven in it. And so it was like flat bread. It was not tasty. And so they would have fish sauce because fish is very salty. And so if they dipped their bread in this sauce, it would become salty and it would become tasty. So when Jesus dipped that bread in the dish, what we would understand if we understood the culture is this is a salt covenant now. He's just put salt on that bread. So Judas selling Jesus out for the 30 pieces and Judas kissing him in the garden, he had already betrayed Jesus before he left that upper room, because he took the bread and ate it, which means I'll lay down my life for you. I will never betray you. And Judas, immediately after he ate that bread, Satan entered him. And, it always starts, we know from James that it really isn't Satan who tempts us. He takes what's already in our hearts and he turns it into a temptation. What's already in. Yes. So Satan energized Judas at that moment to do what he had wanted to do the whole time. And I'm just speculating here, but if you read in context, before that, Jesus is explaining to his dense disciples, tonight, I'm going to be arrested. I'm leaving you. I'm going to prepare a place from you. He was basically saying, I'm going away. Now, the disciples that loved him, Peter, John, they were devastated over this news.
Right.
Peter was like, no, certainly, Lord, get behind me, Satan, right? Peter and John were mourning because they understood what he said. But this is what was in Judas's heart. Judas wanted to be on the inside of the influencers club. He wanted to be riding on the coattails of a powerful rabbi who had influence and power, and that guy was going to become king and overthrow Rome, and he was going to be given a crown and power and glory, and he was going to be one of the inner circle. When Judas's dreams shattered in that moment, when he realized Jesus's kingdom was going to come thousands of years later, and that he was actually going to die like a weak little sheep, I think Judas in that moment felt embarrassment. I think he felt disappointment.
Yep.
I think he felt duped.
Yeah.
And I think that rage boiled inside of him, and he wanted to dissociate from this whole situation. And so he ran off. He broke the salt covenant. This used to be knowledge. People used to know this. It's fallen out of the church. And if you look at the Da Vinci painting, I think it's Da Vinci. I'm not real big on art. I don't know a lot about art, but Judas is the guy grabbing the money, the pieces of silver at the table.
Yes.
Obviously, Judas probably wasn't dumb enough to take 30 pieces of silver, like betrayal money, to this Last Supper with him and hold it at the table. But that obviously that's the way the artist portrayed him. So you would all know that's Judas, right? Yep. So he's holding on to the money. But if you look very closely at his forearm, because his hand is on the table, there is a jar of salt tipped over on the table.
Oh, wow.
Because he broke the covenant. He was a covenant breaker, right? So all that to say, Revelation 3:20 is a threshold covenant. We know the Passover is also a threshold covenant.
Right.
And I am going to share something now, and I would love to take credit for it, because it just, you know that passage in Scripture where the disciples on the road to Emmaus, and they didn't know it was Jesus, and then they found out later, and they ran to tell the others, and they were talking to each other, and they said, were our hearts not burning within us when we heard him talking? Well, what was he talking about? He was explaining to them where he was in all of the prophecies of the law and the prophets. So in other words, Jesus was saying, I know you all think that there's no mention of Jesus Christ in the Old Testament. But guess what? I am all over the Torah and the prophets. And I'm now going to lay out for you one book at a time. Every single time Moses or one of the prophets was referring to me. Yeah. And their hearts burned as they heard it. Because up to that point in time, think about it. This is the first century. Up to thousands of years of rabbinical teaching and knowledge and tradition. These disciples who walked among Jesus still didn't have any of that figured out. And so he unfolded it, and their hearts were connecting with it and burning within them. And so all that to say, I had a moment like that myself yesterday. I had the privilege of being at a Skywatch taping. We live close to the Horns, and Joe has gotten to be such a dear friend of me and my dad's. And so we were there, and Carl Gallups and Zev Parat were on the panel. And Zev started speaking about threshold covenants. And obviously, that's a hot button with me, right? So I was like, oh, he's talking about threshold covenants. Well, then I had this aha moment. He's who I got it from to begin with. But it had been so many years ago, I had forgotten. And I'm like, oh, he's where I got it from. So I immediately felt this, like, I wanted to just go up and hug him, like, because he had opened the scriptures to me. And ever since
you come full circle.
Ever since I connected that threshold covenant, I see it now all over scripture, and it's so amazing. And so I was just on the edge of my seat the whole time as he was talking. So this is something that he said yesterday, and I just have to share it with everybody. I cannot keep silent. So he was talking about Passover, and this was not a new thing. This was extremely day to day in Jewish and pagan culture. They would put blood on the doors, and it was the door was the altar of their homes back then, and sacrifices and threshold covenants and hospitality covenants. This was done all the time. So when they were all out there painting their doors with blood, nobody would have walked by and said, "What are they doing?" Like, it would have been completely normal in that culture.
It would have been known, yeah.
Exactly. So the lintels, like, and the threshold and everything, like the entire threshold, was painted in blood. So you've got, like, basically blood on all four sides, creating this, rectangle. And another thing that Zev clarified, Hebrew is obviously his native language. And he said that the mezuzah is not just the little thing that you stick on your door that has Deuteronomy 6:4 in it, the Shema passage. Mezuzah in Hebrew means threshold. It's the whole thing, right? So when he said that the blood was on all 4 aspects of the door, that if you take that imagery to the cross, and you now have a Messiah who rather strangely referred to himself as a door in John 10. You have got blood coming out of his forehead because of a crown of thorns. You have his arms stretched out with blood on both arms, and then you have the feet. That the blood points are on all positions, and you now have the door with the blood. And if you enter through that door, and only that door, the angel of death, the second one that comes the second time around, passes over. Because you stepped over that threshold and are now within under the protection of the head of that household, which is Jesus Christ, who imputes his righteousness to you. And so it blew my mind. And I'm like, just when I thought,
goosebumps.
I know, just when I thought that this threshold stuff couldn't, it is so integral. And so I always tell people, if this is lighting up all of your lights, I've got 4 books where you can read about this. 3 of them are by H.C. Trumbull, Trumbull, and it's a trilogy of books. It's the Salt Covenant, the Blood Covenant, and the Threshold Covenant. And Trumbull was a Christian. In fact, he was the great-grandfather of Elizabeth Elliot. And but he's not writing theological books. His trilogy is, he wrote it at the very end of the 1800s in around 1889. And believe it or not, these threshold covenants with blood on the door, this stuff was still happening all over the world until the mid-1800s.
Wow.
But by the end of the 1800s, it was falling out of practice because it was gruesome and, we were becoming more centralized in cities. And so he said that he wanted to write so that this wouldn't be forgotten to the ages. The 4th book is Zev's new book. It's called Blood Alliance. And he talks specifically about the threshold covenants and how it pertains to our salvation, how it pertains to Yeshua, how it pertains to the cross. And I was so delighted when I heard him say this yesterday, because I've said it on podcasts. Once you understand the threshold covenant, you will see it everywhere in Scripture. It's everywhere. So that's like the whole Revelation 3:20. The other one, though, that I really want to share with you, because this was so, there's a salvation issue. There's coming to Jesus Christ and receiving him. But then there is, where do you go from there?
Sure.
And how do you avoid that becoming just a religion or a set of rules or legalism or fear-based, like I got to do this and I got to do that? How, once you've received him, is there intimacy?
Right.
This is another threshold. Song of Solomon 5:2, of all bizarre places. We know, of course, that Solomon's writing this to one of his brides, right? But it has a dual metaphorical, analogous sort of a meaning. The double meaning is that Jesus is the bridegroom and we're the bride that he's coming back for. So in Song of Solomon 5:2, you have got a bride who's already gone to bed, and I am going to suggest that she is in that altered state of sleep paralysis. Now, just because you're in an altered state of sleep paralysis where you're half in and half out of sleep doesn't mean there's demons there. Like I'm talking now about what the demons are mimicking. Okay? It says, depending on your translation, it says that the bride was asleep, but her heart was awake. Okay? So when the bridegroom knocks on the door, she faintly hears it in her in and out sort of like, stupor. But she can't get up because she is asleep and she is paralyzed, and in her state of sleep, she's like, I can't get up. And, the language is very sort of euphemistic there. But if you're really looking into it, it's cold. And she's likely sleeping naked, and she just doesn't want to get out of a cold bed like every other human being in the world when their alarm wakes up, right? So she's just like, I don't want to get up. So then all of a sudden she shakes awake. And she's like, what have I done? I turned away the bridegroom. He was going to come in here, and he wanted intimacy with me, and I gave up this opportunity to be held and cherished and be told how much I love him. And so she quickly gets up and goes out. And this is where a lot of people lose the metaphor. They say, well, yeah, but then when she went out to find him, she got beat up. And I even had someone tell me once, the bridegroom would never beat up the bride. You guys, follow the analogy. She never finds the bridegroom. The bridegroom is not the one beating her up. Who beats her up? Who thwarts her from finding Jesus? The watchmen. The men who were appointed to protect and to be on guard for the enemy. And I think the message there is, when we are on our search for the real Messiah, because there's so much lies out there, so much subterfuge, so many false messiahs, so many false doctrines, so much New Age, that sometimes the people that are called or ordained to help us find Jesus are the very ones attacking us and beating us up and making sure we never find him. Wittingly or unwittingly. Some of them probably unwittingly, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So what's so amazing about Song of Solomon 5:2 is this is who the sleep paralysis entities are, and it's their agenda, and it's what they're doing. You can call them shadow men, hat men, incubuses, whatever you want to call them, whatever silly little Hollywood, socially engineered, man-made little monster movie name you want to give them. They're anti-bridegrooms, okay? We talk a lot about antichrists, but anti-Messiah, anti-bridegroom. These things are coming to our rooms at night when we are asleep, but our hearts are awake. And we are in a state of spiritual limbo where we were created to be receptive to intimacy with Jesus Christ. Now, I don't mean astral projection.
Right.
I don't mean anything sexual. I don't mean we dream about him and we wake up with a prophetic dream. I just mean that we wake up the next morning having been fully protected from the enemy who comes out at night.
Right.
We wake up refreshed with our brain fully refragged and our melatonin all in place and nothing out of whack. And we wake up peaceful, well-rested, and with joy and anticipation for the next day, because whether our conscious mind remembers it or not, we were resting in him. And that doesn't mean that he can't, speak to us in that time or come to us in our dreams, or sometimes he likes the bells and whistles too. But if that's what we're looking for, he doesn't always oblige. And there's plenty of impersonators who are very happy to oblige if you're looking for the bells and the whistles. So what they're doing is they are beating the bridegroom to the door. It is the wolf dressed up like grandma, Little Red Riding Hood.
Yep.
We let this thing in because it's a beautiful being of light. And I've never felt so much love in my whole life. And the meaning of the universe is that nothing matters, and everything's just so wonderful, right? And so you think, well, surely this is Jesus, because I'm feeling all of these vibrations in my body and these tinglings, and I'm having this out of body experience. And, it's not always ugly, scary things that are appearing. Sometimes it's
Right.
angelic. Sometimes it's beautiful. Sometimes it's a familiar spirit. So it's grandma or your child that passed away or someone that you're going to trust. And all the emotions are going to go with it. And we're going to let this bridegroom over the threshold. And then what we don't understand, because no one's teaching it, and we've fallen out of this sort of knowledge, as soon as that thing is invited and it steps over the threshold, you are in a covenant with it that can only be broken if the ownership of the home changes hands. And this is where the evangelical church in America has got something right, but gotten it really wrong. When we invite Jesus into our heart, it's not because we're lonely and we need a best friend the rest of our lives, or, we need someone to make sure we don't get in a car wreck and we find parking spots and all this stuff. And it's not a free pass for an easy life or, any of this stuff. What we're doing on a deeply theological level when we invite Jesus into our heart is we're asking him to step over the threshold. And when we submit to him through obedience, by dying to the old man and living anew, what happens in covenants when someone dies?
Something new is born.
The covenant's broken.
It's null and void.
It's till death do you part. You are no longer in a marriage covenant when one of the spouses dies. So the reason we're being called to die to self isn't just because it means we can't drink and smoke anymore, what it means to die to self means when we die, and in baptism we're doing that metaphorically, what we're saying is every betrothal contract that I managed to get myself weaseled into before this moment, null and void, ripped up, torn up. All this, I sold my soul to the devil and I can't get it back. Yeah, you can. But you got to hear his voice, walk to the door, look through the peephole, open the door, invite him in, and then partake in a covenant with him. So there's a lot of stuff you have to do. So if we get ourselves into these situations where we're Christians, but we're still having sleep paralysis night after night after night after night after night, and nothing we do tries. And sometimes the more we try, the more ticked off these things get, and sort of it escalates and gets worse, right? So let's talk about that for a second or two. There's a couple things. I'm gonna tell you the good one that everyone wants to hear first.
Okay.
It is possible that you are under the will and the protection and the permission of God, undergoing a very intentional spiritual warfare type boot camp, because you are being prepared for a time when we are going to need people who can face these entities without fear. And David had to kill a bear and a lion before he got to kill the giant. And so for some people, sleep paralysis is the bear and the giant. It's their practice. They're testing their armor, and they're learning how to face these things without fear. And they're learning how to wield their weapons offensively rather than defensively, rather than fear. Get away, get away, get away. Like, in the name of Jesus, get out. There's a difference between wielding the sword offensively and defensively. Right. Are you going to be balled up in the fetal position on the battlefield, hiding under your shield, or are you going to be storming that line of battle like David, who ran at Goliath? There's a difference. So that's like a best case scenario. Like maybe you're enduring more and more of this because you are being trained. But everybody wants to be the Job in the Sea of Peters, right? Everybody wants to say, I'm being tested because of my faith. And, oh yeah,
Right.
I'm a prayer warrior, so I have a target on my back. We all love to say this kind of stuff. It makes us feel great. But the fact is, most of us, if we really came face to face with these demons, you know what I mean? It's like, we have to stop thinking in terms of, we have to stop using language like, I'm a Christian. Okay. That doesn't mean anything anymore.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean anything anymore.
Yep.
What you have to understand, and like when you're reading things like Psalm 91, God fights for and protects people who are in covenant with him. Okay. And not every Christian is in covenant, because covenant doesn't mean you prayed a prayer and you go to church and you sit there bored stiff thinking about your lunch. And then the rest of the week you do whatever you want. And there's no difference between you and your friends in what you listen to and where you go and what you laugh at and how you dress. Like, that's not a covenant, Think of being a gigolo versus being married, right? There's a huge difference between a guy that's out there playing the field every night of the week and someone who's faithful in a marriage, right? So Psalm 91, we have a threshold covenant in there as well. And nobody seems to really preach. I'd love to hear a whole bunch of sermons on nothing but Psalm 91:9, because we hear everyone knows Psalm 91, and it's the soldier's prayer. And anybody who's scared or who has enemies or who thinks they're going to lose their job or whatever, that 1,000 may fall at my side, right? We know all those verses out of context. And so you look at all of the promises in Psalm 91, almost every verse in that scripture is a promise of strength or protection or cloaking, invisibility, all this stuff you've got. You're hiding under the shelter of his wings. No evil will befall you. No plague will come near your tent. Angels will hold you up in their arms so you won't strike your foot against a stone. You're going to trample on lions and tigers and cobras, and he's going to give you long life, and he's going to answer you when you call upon him. He's going to rescue you. He's going to deliver you. Like, you won't fear the terror by night, the pestilence, the dark. 1,000 may fall at your side. Like, this stuff is, who in their right mind doesn't think Psalm 91 isn't the greatest thing that was ever written? Like, it's amazing. But that chapter is not a promise for people who go to church, people who pray to prayer, people who say they're a Christian. Psalm 91:9 says, because he has made Jehovah his dwelling place. Because means this is why. So this means this person heard me knocking, got up, looked through the people, opened the door, welcomed me in, and broke bread with me. And we all know Christians, and we've all probably known times in our own life where we've heard him knocking and we've said, come on in. But then something's come on TV that we really don't want Jesus watching with us. So we say, hey, see you later. Okay, why don't you go to the store and pick up some milk and eggs, and I'll leave the door open for you and you can come back. The person who has made Yahweh their dwelling place, when Jesus steps over the threshold, his own shed blood that came at a price, we were bought with a price. His own blood gets painted on that door. And he shuts the door and he locks it. And that house gets surrounded by angels. And nobody comes or goes out of that shelter ever again. That door is permanently locked. You're not going in and out at leisure. And neither is Jesus. And so if you want the promises and the protection and the safety and the power that comes from Psalm 91, you got to throw away that key, and you got to stop throwing Jesus out every time you get mad or he offends you, And so this is harsh, and this is where it gets harsh. There are people where it will take them years to get rid of their sleep paralysis. And I don't want them to hear it's because they're not really a Christian, or they don't take their covenant seriously, or they've got some secret sin they've got to give up, and, all this kind of stuff. sometimes we are embedded in so many spiritual contracts, we can't even get to the bottom of them quick enough. And we need the Holy Spirit to reveal the source of some of those things. Some of them will be obvious. Everybody thinks, I slept around before I was married. I smoked pot. I played with the Ouija board. Okay, that's great. And get rid of your Iron Maiden albums and pray your little online prayers about, you can do all this stuff, and it might give you some peace for a little bit. But if there's deep besetting sins, if you're holding a grudge, if you are bitter or jealous, if you feel that God has dealt stingily with you because your friends have this and this and this and you don't.
Ooh, that's a big one.
If you have anything like that, you'd be shocked some of the strongholds that give permission to these things. Yeah. It's not always the big spooky ghost story stuff that everybody thinks it does. There's a lot of people that hang out and conjure things in graveyards, and they listen to their heavy metal. They do all sorts of stuff, and they've never had sleep paralysis. Yep. So you got to think beyond that kind of stuff, and you might need to have the Holy Spirit help you find the source. And there might be more than one source, and some of the sources might not be your fault. It could be a parent or a grandparent. It could be ancestral. It could be bloodline.
Like generational.
It could be generational. It could be some of these secret societies. They pledge their entire bloodline from that point forward over to these things, and those things need to be broken. And so there's all sorts of things.
Yeah.
So.
Vicki, this is a very it's a very hard message for a lot of Christians, because they begin to think that they're not doing enough, or they're not. But I think the message that you're trying to paint is that it's not that you have to do more, it's that what you're doing needs to be genuine. You know what I mean? Like, and I think that's the disconnect sometimes, is people think, well, you're just making fun of me because and we start to get defensive as Christians, and we start to push back. And when the reality is we need to take ownership. This is really what Jesus came to tell us, right? Is that we need to take ownership for our own failings, our own things that we've done, our own sins that have caused these sacrifices to have to go on for years and years and years. These are the things that we've brought on, right? Is all of these things. And we've had some deceptions, and we've had some things that have caused us to go down. And these generational curses that you're talking about, we don't talk about those enough. What are we doing today that's causing our children to have these hardships later on, because we decided that we wanted to do something that was outside of the will of God? And so it's not that anybody's attacking these Christians that are just pew sitting and not really doing it. It's we're trying to encourage people to understand that a lot of these contracts and these threshold things that you're speaking about, this is just how the supernatural works. These are the laws. And we can fight against them. We can kick and scream. We can say that we don't like it all that we want. The fact of the matter is that it's the law of the world that we live in, because this world was built by someone other than us. And when we try to say, I want to do this sin, or I want to do that sin because I don't think it's that bad, that really doesn't matter to God. What matters to God is that you're in covenant with Him. And like you said, coming through the door and communing with us. That's what we need to be doing. And I think a lot of people get caught up in the going to church, and I got to check this box and check that box. What we're saying is there's so much more to it that you do want to experience. Jesus is so much more than church on a Sunday morning. There's an everyday relationship that you get to, and I say get to on purpose, you get to have with Him, and the maker of this world that we live in, the one that knows all the rules, that understands the contracts, the breaker of contracts.
The architect.
He can come in and just smash all of these contracts, but you have to ask, you have to do the research, you have to think about it. So that was
and this is the biggest thing, is that it has to be talked about. And I think that's the biggest point for people that they should understand, is this stuff is not talked about enough.
No,
like for whatever reason, we as a Christian collective have decided that this is out of bounds. Like this is weird. This is too much. We can't talk about this, but it's absolutely has to be talked about. It has to be shared.
Yeah, it does. We have come to this unfortunate place in Christianity where freedom is being defined as freedom to sin, really.
Right.
Because of all this grace. Yeah. The freedom that Jesus is offering us is freedom from this bondage, freedom from the sin. That grace is the freedom to not sin because you don't want to do it anymore, right? Freedom from these contracts. And so, there's so much presumption and negativity associated with certain biblical concepts. So for example, if I say the will of God, people are like automatically like, well, certainly he's going to want a bunch of crap I don't want, don't send me to Africa, this kind of mentality, right?
The Jonah.
Yeah. Like all these poor teenage girls, like in their teens and 20s where, well, I'm not engaged yet, so I guess he wants me to be a missionary and be a nun. Like we always think that the will of God is this stingy, I want every single thing from you, and you're going to just be happy someday in eternity that you sacrificed everything and had no fun and no joy in life. And but what if when I said the will of God, what I meant was his will, like everything that I was going to inherit? Now it's like, oh, you mean the will of God? Like I'm going to go into a lawyer's office and have all this stuff, right? And so I think the same thing with all this stuff that we think, and I'm playing, Rick, on what you were saying there. It's not about legalism, which is bondage.
Sure.
Coming up with a formula or 100 things you need to do before you go to bed to avoid sleep paralysis is not freedom. It's more bondage. And it creates anxiety. And it can also be a form of invitation, because when you have anxiety, that's low-level fear, and that's what draws these things to begin with. So it's not coming up with 1,000 things to do before. And oh gosh, I prayed over 500 things before I went to bed, but I forgot to pray about this thing, and so oh no, like the freedom that we have and all of these things that God wants to rescue us from, the source of the sleep paralysis that he wants to reveal to you, it's not to load a burden on you or to make you feel shame or to say like, oh, look what a horrible sinner you are, or to put you in a place of vulnerability where you have to go into a pastor's office and admit every single horrible thing you've ever done to get freedom from this. And no, why he wants to show you all of this stuff is so that you can take a blowtorch to all of it and have victory over it. The end result of everything in the law and in the gospel and in the will of God, the end is always for our freedom and for our victory and for our prosperity and for our joy. And if you're a born-again Christian and your definition of joy and happiness is getting to do whatever you want, and I'm going to hold back part of my life or heart from Jesus because I want to drink, smoke, and swear and party and go to clubs, then you have to evaluate what that betrothal covenant you willfully entered into really means to you. And is that the same thing that the Bible means when it promises protection and prosperity upon people who are in this covenant? When you say, yeah, I'm in that covenant, are you on the same page? Are you literally on the same page with what Jesus means when he says, I want you to die to the old self and let me step over the threshold? I will tear up the deed, and all of these vampires will no longer be able to cross the threshold. And if they even try, they're going to meet with the doorkeeper because this is my place now. So there's just so much beauty in this threshold covenant, but it's a double-edged sword. It's great once you get there, but it is really hard killing the flesh. And that's what has to happen before this happens, before you're really there. And that's what it all comes down to, is making war with the flesh. And Paul talks about it. Why do I keep doing the things I don't want to do? Oh, whoa, what wretched man that I am. Who will save me from this body of death? Like, we should all feel that. We should all feel that tension. And if we don't feel that tension, we're not thinking enough about that concept.
Yeah, no, I would agree wholeheartedly. And if we're not thinking that way, then I would venture to say that we're not on the path, because I think a lot of people think that when you get saved at church and you pray that prayer you were speaking of, then that's it. You're saved, which I believe you are justified. Yes,
justified.
But there is a process of sanctification, of fixing all of these things that have happened before that, whether they've been intentional sins, whether they've been these contracts, as you spoke of, maybe your parents were Masons and they pledged your whole bloodline to Satan. Like, these are things that can be fixed. These are very specific things that can be fixed, but we have to realize that you have to do the work. You have to do the work. Jesus is wanting to meet you. He's not wanting to continue to chase you. He will, and he does. Unfortunately, he is really good at having to chase people around. But he wants to meet you, and he just wants you to turn around. That means to repent. That's the first thing he says when he starts his ministry. Turn around and stop doing those things that you're doing. I'm standing right behind you. I've been chasing you this whole time. So this has been such a great episode. I'm so glad that you got to go through all of that for us. I know that we have much more that we would love to explore with you. But I know that for a lot of Christians out there, this is a big burden for us, right? This is the heaviness of the covenant. And it should be a heaviness of covenant that you're in with the creator of the world, right? That should mean something to us. But it's also, the Bible says his burden is light. And we have to realize that even though the covenant is heavy, his burden is light, and he's not going to give us more than we can handle. He's just asking us to walk through the fire. Like you said with your book, you have to take those steps. You have to walk through the fire. Sometimes you have to slay a dragon before you get these big responsibilities that God is giving out right now, hand over fist, by the way. He's giving out all kinds of gifts and things right now. So with that, Vicki, where can people find you to learn more about you and your message and the things that you're doing out there in the world?
Yep, absolutely. So you can find me at VickiJoyAnderson.com. That's VICKI, Vicki with an I. And all my podcasts that I've been on is on the media tab. You can email me through that, upcoming shows or conferences I'm at. You can get me at Vicki Joy Author on Instagram, and you can DM me on there or follow me on there. The book, They Only Come Out at Night, Exposing the Dark Weapon of Sleep Paralysis, is available on lamarzulli.net. And what else? I think that's everything. And
we'll put all that stuff too, so that people have the links to you.
Awesome. Wonderful.
Vicki, you're such a joy to hang with and to speak with. Your knowledge and the amount of time and effort that you've put into learning what you know, and your willingness and just your ability to come on and speak so well to our audience. We're just so thankful, and we're happy that we can call you a friend, and you're welcome here on this podcast anytime.
Awesome.
Yes.
Thank
All right,
you guys
with that, we're
so
going
much.
to take off. Oh, you're welcome, and thank you again, guys. This has been That's So Fringy podcast, and we will see you guys on the next one. Bye. For now.